America's continuing growth depends on the health of her people. A plentiful supply of nutritious, wholesome food will keep our nation strong. Abundant protein-rich meat contributes to the well-being and strength of our people and our country. Meat is a favorite with almost everyone, everywhere. Nowadays, more and more of the meat you buy comes to you fully prepared, ready to eat.
Our story begins here, when President Bush, in a surprise move, announces to the American people that the United States had depleted its supply of cattle. This was as a direct result of feed from China, which was tainted, and as a result, all of the cattle had to be destroyed, leaving the United States essentially meatless. Luckily for the United States, President Bush asked the Department of Agriculture to come up with a solution. And a solution is what they came up with. In the meat inspecting report, they suggested a solution of using enemy combatants as a new food source. And the best part of this solution, the report states, the report states, is that enemy combatants can be prisoners of war as well as American citizens.
These requirements are set forth in the regulations governing the meat inspection of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Great care has been taken in establishing these rules. Equally great care is taken to maintain them. They are revised as necessary to keep up with changing times and new products.
In fact, the report recommends that the United States uses the Social Security numbers of American citizens to select potential enemy combatants in a type of lottery system. Selecting Social Security numbers at random ensures the United States a plentiful new food source. While there was some outrage at the proposed plan, President Bush was quick to point out that most of the enemy combatants would actually be prisoners of war.
They represent more than 80% of the commercial meats slaughtered in this country.
President Bush, to put the American people at ease, stressed that meat inspectors would take special precautions for prisoners of war used as enemy combatant food sources.
Meat inspectors throughout the country are being trained and equipped to check for possible residues of radioactive fallout,
as most of the prisoners of war were killed with depleted uranium bullets, and therefore radiation was a risk. Whether the enemy combatant food sources were prisoners of wars or American citizens, President Bush reassured the public that they were safe to consume because they carried the mark of wholesomeness.
All meat that passes inspection is stamped with a round purple mark of wholesomeness. The law requires this mark for all meat shipped across state lines or in foreign commerce.
As a bonus, meat from American citizen enemy combatants who were not prisoners of war had an extra stamp added. Meat with this extra stamp would be highly desired by consumers and considered premium. For President Bush, the use of enemy combatants as a new food source was a no-brainer. And with the help of special interest groups, he lobbied Congress for approval. And while there was much debate in Congress, overall, the recommendation was approved. With the approval of the new legislation, detention camps were emptied and hundreds upon hundreds of enemy combatants went to slaughter. Yes, nothing was wasted. Not one piece of meat from these enemy combatants. Everything was used. Some of the less wholesome parts of the enemy combatant were ground up into hamburger. Since the more sensitive parts of the enemy combatant were used in hamburger, a special flavoring was added to cover up the rancid taste. Not to be outdone, even the unspeakable parts of the enemy combatant were used in hot dogs. Ensuring a plentiful source of food for America. Yes, even the waste of enemy combatants was used to make stews and gravies. Though it's true that using the waste of enemy combatants sometimes produced awful smells that the workers had to get used to. Yes, even fast food chains took advantage of the enemy combatant in the form of patties. To make sure America accepted this plan, President Bush assured the American public that all of the enemy combatant meat would be inspected very carefully. Of course, this was a lie, and as long as it looked okay, the meat passed. Part of the marketing campaign for the enemy combatant meat was that it had to resemble products that used to be made of beef and other meats, like this bacon, for instance, which is made from 100% enemy combatant.
Specialty dishes, in addition to meeting all other requirements, must also have a reasonable resemblance to the form and taste historically established for them. Even the picture on a label must be accurate. It cannot show more meat than the package contains.
As part of the propaganda marketing program for enemy combatant meat was a string of cooking television shows shown daily on national stations. Yum yum, do you recognize the enemy combatant meat simmering in the broth of enemy combatant waste? Yum yum. A real boost in the enemy combatant meat marketing program came when President Bush, as part of the No Child Left Behind Act, made enemy combatant meat meals mandatory for all school children. Soon, enemy combatant meats were found in grocery stores all over the United States. And not only that, enemy combatant meats came in all shapes and sizes. President Bush took most of the credit for averting the crisis and supplying the United States of America with an endless supply of wholesome meat.
meats are an accepted part of our everyday life. No more grinding, mixing, slicing, or even cooking at home unless you want to. This time-consuming work is done for you. Prepared meats, inspected and passed by the United States Department of Agriculture, are clean, safe, wholesome, and truthfully labeled.
At least that's what President Bush hoped that the American people would believe after he passed legislation to use enemy combatants as America's new food source. To make sure that this legislation would succeed with the American people and would not meet opposition, President Bush created a propaganda department called the Department of Homeland Marketing. Their first task was to create television commercials to run on national stations, announcing how good enemy combatant meat tastes and how wholesome it is for you.
Start with truly good meat, properly cooked. Add barbecue fixins that are tangy and tasty, made from finest ingredients, blended the old-fashioned way. Put the barbecued meat on a tender bun, and you've got some eatin' that's world-beaten. Try our famous barbecue at the refreshment stand now.
Unfortunately for President Bush, much of these commercials lacked any kind of quality. This was mostly due to the fact that the Department of Homeland Marketing awarded all of their commercial production contracts to one company, Halliburton, in the form of no-bid contracts. And Halliburton was well aware that it didn't really matter what the contents of the commercials were. Just as long as it filled up 30 to 60 seconds, they would get paid, and they knew it.
The sandwich is practically an American institution. It is a basic essential for lunch boxes, parties, and picnics. As far as these boys are concerned, well, hamburgers and hot dogs are their idea of a really good meal. But there are sandwiches and sandwiches. When Sally Gasco and her mother bring guests home for a late snack after a movie, they have something special in the way of a sandwich in mind. Let's watch how she makes it. This is a sandwich for forks, an open-face creation, in other words. Part of the trick to entertaining unexpected guests is keeping on hand certain generally useful foods. It is a good idea to add something for variation in color and texture. Sally knows you should serve cream dishes with extra caution. An effective carelessness here is no asset. Mother is a great believer in the aesthetic value of parsley, and of course it's good to eat, too. Now a touch of Tabasco for color, and as we said, there are sandwiches and sandwiches. A wise young homemaker using good techniques and equipment and a little imagination can turn a sandwich into festive fare.
Another setback was brought to President Bush's attention. While using enemy combatants as a new food source averted one problem, unfortunately, it also created others. After all, cannibalism is difficult on the digestive system, and the prolonged use of enemy combatants as a meat source created new problems in the form of flatus, in other words, gas.
Just look at that plate. Aren't you feeling well, Bill? Aren't you hungry? What can be the matter? After supper, it's fun to play a while before bed. But there's still something wrong, isn't there, Bill? In a moment, you'll know what it is. Yes, Bill, you're getting a stomachache. You have a stomachache, it isn't any fun to play. There it is again. Poor Bill. What now? We'll soon know, because here comes Mother. Mother can tell right away that Bill isn't feeling well. So, what happens next? Yes, Bill's put to bed to get some rest. Now, why does Bill have a stomach ache? He didn't eat anything bad today, did he?
The potential side effect of eating enemy combatant meat on a long-term basis really upset President Bush, especially when he learned that it was more prevalent in adults than children. Yes, unfortunately, the eating of enemy combatant meats on a long-term basis caused catastrophic side effects. Often, they would start very subtly. Sometimes the odor from these gas attacks were just too much, and people had to walk instead of drive. These heinous gas attacks were a total source of embarrassment for other family members, and caused many couples to split up. These gas attacks continued at work as well, and were an endless source of embarrassment.
Mr. Hall, are you all right?
What's the matter with you? Who asked you to come chasing out here?
Why does a man act like this? Is he just born sour, or does the problem go deeper? Where Steve Hull's concerned, those aren't the easiest questions in the world to answer, because Steve's got more than one side. He's not always a grouch and a sourpuss. Does a man good sometimes to have to type his own reports. When a gal's got a cold, she belongs home in bed. Steve's a sharp boy with an idea. He saved the firm a lot of money on the Cosgrove process. That certainly didn't do him any harm with Mr. Winston. When the first tally showed a loss, he went over the figures himself at night till he found the error. You see, Steve's the ambitious type. He works at it, at the office and at home, too. Lately, he's made friends with Lester Glines over at Arrow. A contact like that may get him a higher-paying job. The Hulls have a nice place. A little expensive, maybe, but nice. Ellen's nice, too. Steve's kids don't exactly hate him. The Hull home's attractively furnished. Ellen, too. She picks up things on sale. Today, well, mink certainly sets her off, doesn't it? Paying for it may take a little doing, of course. What's $900 for a stole against $5,000 for a car? At least fur keeps you warm. Oh, those rows, they tie knots in a man's gut. piles. They tie knots in a man's gut.
In certain cases, these gas attacks from enemy combatant meats make the person become aggressive.
Then his temper cuts loose. He yells at everybody, even Ruth. The men he works with don't like it. It makes for more hard feelings, more mistakes all around. So, work piles up on Steve's desk. He feels like he has to check everything. Once he almost got in a fight with a mean-tempered foreman out in the shop.
Who had accused him of farting. Of course, Steve denied this. As a result, he was severely reprimanded. As Steve's gas attacks progressed, no one really wanted to be around him.
Do you ever win when you end up with stomach pains so sharp they make the boss order you to see a doctor?
Now there it is, Steve. That irregular bulge there. It's a lesion. A place with tissues worn away. That's why it's so important to start treatment as soon as possible.
You sound awfully definite about this.
I can't afford not to be, not where your health is concerned. That's why I took all these tests. Had you drink that barium, took these x-rays. I wanted to be sure of my ground before I reached my final diagnosis. Well, now I've got my proof.
Now, wait a minute, Doctor. I think that...
Steve, you wait a minute. What you think has no bearing whatever on your condition.
You see, your stomach's a sort of sack with walls 4 layers thick. The outside walls are made of muscle tissue. When those muscles contract, the action helps digest your food. When your stomach's empty, those same contractions yell, "I'm hungry." The message goes to your brain, and automatically an answer comes down the vagus nerve, tells your stomach to get ready for dinner. Gastric juice flows from the stomach lining, a juice that's compounded of dilute hydrochloric acid, pepsin, and renin. That way, your stomach's all ready to start work the minute you swallow the first.
You're not really sure that they like you. So you're always worrying about things such as whether they're going to sneer at you or slap you down. It keeps you on tense and on edge all the time.
Steve is in total denial of his condition and the way it affects people.
Now, wait a minute. Only a jerk would act like that. A complete idiot.
Now, jerk's hardly the word for it. He may not even know that he's not sure of himself and pushing too hard to make up for it.
That still spells jerk to me, and I don't like it. Only a complete idiot would act that way.
Well,
And I'm paying you for medicine, not a bunch of crazy theories.
Hull, for heaven's sake, stop pushing. Stop thinking I'm against you. Now, look, Steve. I'm your doctor. Remember? Your friend. You're only cutting your own throat when you act this way. You've got to face up to reality. You've got to be honest with yourself about the way you feel about things.
Finding a new doctor sounds like a better answer to me.
You can walk out on your doctor, but you can't walk out on yourself. And whiskey's no answer. Well, a man's got to go home and face the music sometime. Ellen seems to have some questions, Steve. That's it, Steve. Go ahead. Ask her what makes it any of her business.
After eating large quantities of enemy combatants, the side effects were finally too much for Steve, and it caused him to almost lose his life. Unfortunately, the doctor was unaware of the side effects of eating enemy combatant meats for a long period of time, and thought that Steve was just farting for fun.
I wish I had the right words for you two, but I guess you're the kind that has to make up your own. You know, Steve, ambition can be misdirected. It's no good if it kills you. If you want to live, you've got to find out what's pushing you. Do something about it. Ellen, remember one thing.
The doctor went on to scold Ellen for participating in Steve's strange farting game. The doctor suspected that this was some kind of sexual fetish, and that farting brought the couple pleasure. He thought it was a game to them.
As far as I'm concerned, it's high time that the two of you grew up and joined the human race.
What do you think you're doing?
I'm going to take this fur back. Do you mind?
I certainly do. Fowler-offs aren't going to give you a refund on a special.
They'll give me a refund.
I said forget it. No wife of mine is going to beg favors from anybody.
Steve.
What?
Steve, I don't care about begging. I don't care about anything. Not if you'll just get well. Steve, don't you understand? I love you. Steve, without you, let me so. Do you think it really matters to me? I wouldn't care if we were still living in that slummy flat at Jackson.
Sadly, Ellen thought that if she made up with her husband, that perhaps he would quit farting.
I love you. Remember, I'm your wife. I love you.
Oh, Ellen, don't ever let me forget that. Don't ever lose.
While President Bush was fully aware of the side effects of eating enemy combatant meats on a long-term basis, he invoked executive privilege and promised the Department of Agriculture full immunity if this ever came to light. He instructed the program to continue, even though more and more reports came streaming in. Yes, even Steve's old boss eventually succumbed to the side effects of eating enemy combatant meats on a long-term basis, and as a result, almost farted to death. As more and more people succumbed to the illness, tempers raged, accusations of farting were common, and sometimes the reactions to those farts were violent.
Spoiled work goes up when there's hate in the shop. Absent time, too. Some men quit.
Eventually, everyone suffered from this side effect of chronic farting.
Production, down.
Finally, President Bush had to admit that there was a problem. After workforce production declined, under intense pressure, President Bush set up the enemy combatant meat commission, though he really didn't want to. However, President Bush said that the investigation should be confined to Congress because it deals with sensitive information that could reveal sources and methods that should not be privy to the American public. The commission was set up to prepare a full and complete account of the circumstances surrounding the side effects of ingesting enemy combatant meats for a long period of time. The commission was also mandated to provide recommendations designed to guard against future side effects. Unfortunately, the fact that the commission members were appointed by George W. Bush, as well as Congress, led to the criticism that it was not a truly independent commission. And, as stated in the report, that it wasn't their aim to assign individual blame. And as President Bush states, who could have ever foreseen that eating enemy combatant meats would lead to such appalling side effects? The Enemy Meat Combatant Commission went to work, gathering information, looking at the way that the meat was distributed, looking at the contents of the meat as well, to try to find the source causing these grotesque side effects. They were very thorough. Meeting behind closed doors with the commission, President Bush learned just how bad the situation was. As it turns out, people across the United States were suffering from the side effects of eating enemy combatant meats for a long period of time. Yes, even small infants who were fed enemy combatant meat baby foods suffered. Many farted to death and did not survive. Yes, President Bush learned that children across America were constantly being scolded for farting. In fact, many kids were still being fed this meat. President Bush learned that it really was an epidemic, and that families were being torn apart by the chronic farting that accompanied eating enemy combatant meats on a long-term basis. The side effects of chronic farting created hate in the family, and this happened at the dinner table and elsewhere. No one was immune from being scolded for chronic farting. President Bush was surprised to learn that the farting would continue in public schools across America. Students didn't learn anything because the teachers spent all their time scolding the farters. Yes, even athletics were hit hard by chronic farters. Most games were suspended. President Bush also learned that across the United States, interpersonal relationships were doomed to fail because of chronic farting. Most disturbing for President Bush was when he learned that the military was affected as well, and as a result, all combat operations had been suspended. President Bush finally had to admit that the side effects of eating enemy combatant meats for a long period of time, in the form of farting, was threatening the American way of life. The epidemic continued, and President Bush knew he had to act when he had to repeal the No Child Left Behind Act because of disruptions in public classrooms across the United States were being so severely disrupted by chronic farting. Repealing the No Child Left Behind Act was a real setback for President Bush.
Judy, what's wrong? He did it. He's always teasing me.
I didn't do a thing. You saw me. I was just sitting here.
He's right. She did it herself. You heard her.
Class, all right. One at a time, please. Jack, Judy, now let's see if we can't get to the bottom of this. Jack, tell me what...
Whatever happened in this classroom is going to take a great deal of explaining. Suppose we go back to the day the trouble really started. Oh, there's the bell.
Good morning.
Good morning. Woo-wee, stinky.
Oh, you stop that. All right, now, let's all find our places, please. Time for class to begin.
It began as simply as that. Jack first teased Judy on impulse, Most teasing begins that way. Some of it never goes any farther than good-natured bantering. Yet Jack persisted in tormenting Judy. She felt Jack was no longer trying to be funny as much as he was trying to hurt her feelings.
You stinky, Judy is so stinky. Stinky, 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 stinky.
The situation seemed to gather momentum of its own, like a snowball rolling downhill. Until Judy dreaded meeting Jack at all. Until she hated to go to school where he could tease her. Her schoolwork began to suffer. She spent more time worrying about Jack's next attack than about her studying.
Judy, could you stay a moment? I'd like to talk with you.
Why, yes, Miss Brown. I'll see you.
Judy, you've been very unhappy lately. Something's troubling you, something that interferes with your schoolwork. Wouldn't you like to tell me about it? Judy, I want to help you. What's wrong?
There isn't anything wrong, Miss Brown. May I go now?
Yes, you may go. But if you ever feel like talking about it, won't you let me know?
Classmates who could see what was going on were beginning to take an active interest.
I think it's awful. I think you should have told Miss Brown what Jack's been doing. Well, I don't want to be a tattletale. Not if I can help it. But... oh, I don't know what I'll do, but I'll think of something.
Finally, one day, the business all came to a head.
All right, class. Bill has just told us what he considers to be the important effects of the Industrial Revolution. The invention of the sewing machine and the invention of the cotton gin. Do the rest of you have any other ideas? All right, Judy, how about you? What do you think?
Well, Miss Brown, I think that...
There we have the incidents leading up to the unhappy situation in which Judy and Jack found themselves. The point is, what could have been done? What should have been done before Jack's disregard for the other fellow's feelings resulted in this? What do you think? Should Judy have reported Jack's actions to Miss Brown?
Judy, I just want to help you. What's wrong?
Miss Brown, well, it seems sort of silly when you go to tell about it, and I don't want to tattle, but, well, it's Jack Sims. He teases me all the time. He could smell it, and ever since he's been driving me crazy. He's been calling me Stinky. Sims, he teases me all the time. He could smell it, and ever since he's been driving me crazy. He's been calling me Stinky.
Do you think bringing the problem out in the open, tattling, if you want to call it that, would have been justified and the wisest thing for Judy to do? Or do you believe that under ordinary circumstances, the problem would have worked itself out with a little more help on the part of Judy's schoolmates?
You stinky.
Or there's another course Judy might have tried, retaliation, getting even with Jack.
Say, what's the big idea? What do you think you're doing? What are you talking about? I have the faintest idea of what you mean.
Wherever you go, there will be teasers. Occasionally, these people are amusing, more often simply discourteous and annoying. But teasers may do real damage if they ridicule others because they look or act differently. Or, as in Judy's case, because they are victims of circumstances. Wherever you go, there will be those who can't take it. When someone is making every effort to hurt our feelings, very few of us can take it. Even if you are never the teaser, or never the one being teased, you will meet this problem. There is a Judy or Jack among your friends. What should Judy have done? Did Jack know what he was doing? Or Judy? If you were Jack, if you were one of their classmates, what would you do?
Luckily for America, President Bush did not eat any of the enemy combatant meat, exclaiming,
"I'm the damn president. I'm not going to eat that crap."
And as a result, he avoided any of these side effects, such as chronic farting. Instead, he met with 3 old business partners from his oil days, in the hopes that they would secretly import a few head of cattle so that President Bush could feed himself properly.
Of a scene that's all friendliness. Next aboard the American warship is Haile Selassie, Emperor of Ethiopia. One of the most colorful visits to the presidential cruiser was that of the ruler of Saudi Arabia, King Ibn Saud. Special arrangements for food and comfort were installed on the American destroyer, aboard which lived the king and his entourage. All the traditional splendor of the mysterious East is manifested in the costumes of the royal party. The 65-year-old monarch leaves his country for the first time to attend this meeting.
After a couple weeks of negotiation, President Bush's Middle Eastern buddies came through, and a few head of cattle were secretly imported into the United States to feed President Bush. Granted, in exchange, he had to promise them record oil profits the following summer. Still, he considered it a small price to pay to avoid eating enemy combatant meats himself. As the chronic farting epidemic grew, President Bush tried to find a solution. Sadly, no matter how many tests he ordered, they could not find a solution to the side effects. As angry farting mobs protested in front of the White House, yelling for President Bush's impeachment, he finally had to suspend the enemy combatant meat program. During a national press conference, President Bush announced that they would take up many of the suggestions that the Enemy Combatant Meat Commission has suggested. With this announcement, President Bush set up what he called dream hospitals across the country.
A medical dream comes true under the drive of industrialist Henry Kaiser, who holds the plans of the ultra-modern hospital designed by Dr. Sidney Garfield, director of the Kaiser Foundation. From the admissions office on, everything is streamlined and expedited. The patient's record reaches the doctor before he does. This is the last word in a combination X-ray machine and fluoroscope imported from Holland at a cost of $25,000. Every portion of the body through 180 degrees can be photographed. In the operating room, the first light of its kind is installed. No portion of an operation is ever in shadow, nor is the expectant father forgotten. Here he can get the news officially and suffer under the most comfortable circumstances possible. And for mother, well, she has only to call for her baby, and baby comes sliding through a wall in a drawer-like bassinet for a little visit with the new mother. In this $2 million institution, doors are opened by remote control, and on the single floor, patients are easily moved from place to place. Dream grounds for a dream hospital. The answer to a doctor's prayer.
President Bush also announced that he was going to make mandatory another suggestion by the commission, that by law, all citizens of the United States had to wear adult diapers. This immediately calmed things down among the American public.
I don't know if I'll buy that. I don't know if I'll buy that. I don't know if I'll buy that.
You will once you think it through.
While there was some hesitation by the public about wearing adult diapers, in the end, they did. Pampers and Depends were the preferred brand. For people like Steve, wearing an adult diaper changed everything.
The clerks, he found, do better when somebody isn't always yelling at them. Ruth's typing's improved now that the pressure's off. And the other day, Steve found she'd turned down a transfer. Mr. Winston keeps an eye on costs and profits, but he does it in a relaxed sort of way, doesn't push or try to take over all the responsibility. Things eased up at home. Now that he takes time for the kids, presents don't seem to matter quite so much. Ellen? Why, Ellen's decided life can be worth living even without a mink stole. But the real payoff, the final test, came late the other afternoon down at the office.
Night, Mr. Hall. See you tomorrow.
Good night.
You see, President Bush took another suggestion from the commission and made it law that all cars must be convertibles.
Night, Mr. Hall. See you tomorrow.
Good night.
Sadly, President Bush, some months later, was impeached for his role in the plot to use enemy combatants as America's new food source. Also, a new law was created.
It requires that food products containing meat have to be labeled properly. These labels accurately describe the contents. This provision in the law safeguards your interests. It helps protect you from misinformation or deception.